I'm VanderMey. I'm a tech editor at Bloomberg. And let's jump right in. Ian, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you started the business?
Sure. My name is Ian Siegel. I'm the co-founder and CEO of ZipRecruiter. Every month, over 100,000 businesses use our platform to recruit talent, and more than 10 million job seekers use our platform to find work.
So why did you start ZipRecruiter?
Well, early in my career, I got into the startup space, and then I worked serially at these startups. And what is true of these companies is usually they're too small to have their own HR department that does the recruiting for you. So I was doing my own job posting and recruiting. And I'm older than most of the people in this room, so I was posting to Monster, Career Builder, Hot Jobs, Craigslist, LinkedIn. And it was the same job, but I had to go through a different process for everyone, and it took so much time. And so I always had this idea. I said, what if we just had a magic button we could push, and then your job would go to all the different job sites across the web, and then all the candidates would come into one list, making recruiting easy. And that's exactly what we built for ZipRecruiter.
So one thing I want to ask is, because unemployment is low, the job market is tight, you guys have been around for a long time, almost 10 years. What is the hiring business like right now?
Well, it's fascinating times. When I started the business, nationwide unemployment was 10%. Today it's 4%. I think you've had 100 straight months of job growth in the US. You're at what many consider to be peak employment. And so it is a golden age for job seekers right now. I think it's interesting because when we survey job seekers, they still have a lot of anxiety about losing their job, which is ironic because they've never had more leverage in their lifetime than right now. And so employers are starved for talent, particularly talent that is experienced with specialized skills. So that skills gap really defines this current era.
So as somebody who's really close to the hiring data, I want to ask about the specter of AI and the jobs apocalypse. Are robots going to take all of our jobs?
Well, I spend a lot of time on this because obviously we study the world of work, but specifically as it relates to recruiting, what I can tell you is we have been experimenting with AI for 3 years. For those of you who've never used AI, we use that expression when we're talking about either machine learning, which is a software approach, or deep learning, which is akin to machine learning but a little bit different. And to give you a taste of how powerful this technology is, our business was 6 years old, and for 6 years we had been trying to optimize the quality of candidates that we delivered to employers using traditional heuristic approaches to algorithms. We had been able to drive the thumbs up rate on candidates who applied from 12%, which is what just happens if you just let anybody who wants to apply, all the way up to 16%. So not much improvement. That was 6 years of work, and then we hired a team of Israelis who were really elite data scientists. They put together our first machine learning approach to doing matching, and Gen 1, the very first version we produced, had a 30% thumbs up rate on the candidates that it picked for employers. So it was an evolutionary change in the quality of candidates we could deliver. That was 2 years ago. There's been many subsequent generations of improvement. The most recent algorithm generates candidates that get a thumbs up at a 48% rate. So when people ask me about AI in recruiting, what I tell them is, look, the dawn of robot recruiting is already here. No human or no human-based approach will ever again be as good as what these algorithms can do. Does that mean there is no place for humans in the recruiting process? Absolutely not. This is a great example of how AI is applied across many categories, which in most cases it's an enhancer. It's not a replacement for the human. And I'll give you a quick test for everyone in the audience. Right? How many of you have been called by a recruiter while you were currently employed? And how many of you listened to what the company was and what the job was when the recruiter called you? The answer is most of us. And why do you listen? Even if you're happy at your current job, it's intoxicating. It's like getting picked up at a bar. It's somebody telling you that they like you, and it becomes a story you tell. You go to your colleagues and your family, you say, you'd never guess who recruited me today. Google, right? How attractive am I? There's always going to be a place for people in the recruiting process.
So, if people are the ones training the algorithms, how are you making sure that they're not incorporating their own biases?
So the question of unconscious bias literally haunts my business, because what I do is I take the data from literally almost 2 million employers' interactions with tens of millions of job seekers. And then I write algorithms based on the insights that can be gleaned to determine who to serve up next to those employers. And unconscious bias is unbelievably strong and prevalent across society. And you may think, that's the old people, not me. I don't have the unconscious bias. Well, let me tell you about Google, because Google published some data on themselves. If you have an African American or Latino name, you had an 18% lower likelihood of getting an interview at Google. And when they saw that data, they were like, oh my goodness, we are the ultimate meritocracy. How could that be? And so then they went and they looked at their employees who were African American or Latino, and you know what they discovered? They had exactly the same bias, same 18% lower likelihood of bringing somebody in for an interview. So the thing about unconscious bias is it's unconscious. And how are we going to solve that problem? There's really only two options. Option number one is we can go to the 180 million working adults in America, and one by one we can explain to them what unconscious bias is and introduce them to their own biases and train them how they can avoid making those bias mistakes. That to me is knife fighting in the jungle. Good luck with that strategy. The other way we can do it is actually with the algorithms that we're using, because we get to choose what information goes into those algorithms. Here is a very simple example. We do not include the job seeker's name when we feed it into the algorithm. Why do we exclude name? Because from name you get gender, in some cases you get ethnicity, and in some cases you get religion. It is important for us to make the algorithm as blind to bias as we possibly can, and it is hard. It is hard because particularly when you go to deep learning, and I'm not going to turn this into a lecture on deep learning, it gets so complicated what the algorithm is doing that we can't actually reverse engineer why it's making the recommendations that it is. We just measure it based on results. And so things that we discover are things like, oh, look at this. The algorithm still has gender bias. Why? Because waiter and waitress are ways for the algorithm to deduce if you are a man or woman. So then you start going, oh my God, what are all the different ways I have to remove bias from the data set that I feed into the algorithm? But I do believe algorithmic-based approaches to addressing bias are the only possible solution.
Are you working with companies on that? Are they receptive to that sort of tweaks in the algorithm?
Well, so I now have I think it's 150 engineers working on search, and even some of the insights I've shared with you today would be considered intensely proprietary insights. So we don't tell people how we do what we do, but we are deeply thoughtful about these issues.
Can you talk a little bit more about, without revealing any secrets, about what the company is doing with AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's there's a couple of truths in my industry in particular, which is we all think about job search as a matching problem. And what it turns out is matching is 25% of the problem we have to solve. It's important. It's at the top of the funnel. It's the first problem you have to solve. But I can send the perfect candidate to an employer, and then if the employer doesn't interact with that candidate for 30 days, that candidate has moved on, right? And likewise, if the employer reaches out to the candidate and the candidate doesn't respond very quickly, the employer goes to the next person on the list. And so it turns out that while we are doing yeoman's work with improving the quality of matching. A lot of what we have to work on is social engineering. But I will tell you the most interesting insight that I've deduced from all of the algorithmic work we've done, which is employers are terrible at writing job descriptions. I can prove that quantitatively. Do you know how I know that? If we have the algorithm matched to the job description the employer provides, the thumbs up rate is significantly lower than if as soon as they see a candidate and give them a thumbs up, we just try to match to find other candidates that look like that candidate. It turns out employers know what they like when they see it, but they can't describe what they want until they see it. And so there's this really interesting possibility in the future that you may never write a job description again. You might just say job title and location, and then we will just start showing you candidates, trying to get you to give us that thumbs up signal, and you will be delighted with the candidates we provide from that point forward.
What does that mean for a job seeker? If I'm a job seeker and I'm not necessarily qualified for the description I'm reading, should I just go for it anyway?
This is the two questions I get asked most are about unconscious bias, and then the other is the scrappy work ethic, high EQ individual who's ready to learn. And it's so interesting to me because that is such a common question that I get. Like, how does that person break into a job they are currently not qualified for now? Like, I don't think anything changes in an algorithmic world other than the sorting of candidates who've applied to a job is being driven by algorithms. So maybe there's a lower probability they even get considered. But I think there's real conflict in this country between what are the current laws. There's these things called fair hiring laws, which say you're not allowed to put any of the data into the candidate review process that could potentially bias an employer. So you're not allowed to consider things like marital status, do they have kids, what gender are they, what religion are they, what sexuality are they, and that all those laws were written pre-social networks. It is trivially easy once I have your name for me to look up your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook profile, to learn an incredible amount of like what is nope. Sure. What is historically illegal information to include. And so I think there's a real transformation. Like, we're going to all have to get really comfortable with the fact that in our exhibitionist sharing so much data about ourselves across so many different social platforms, that data is going to get incorporated. And so yes, it can hurt you, but back to that scrappy, high EQ, great work ethic individual, I think it's also going to help those people. You finally have an opportunity to sort of show more than just a sheet of data about yourself, but really who you are.
So you're a liberal arts major. Do you feel like that you are one of those people? Yeah, liberal arts.
So funny. I will tell you this. I wanted to be a writer when I went to college, and then I actually wrote my first couple movies, and I discovered it's the loneliest existence you could have. And I was on the Warner Brothers lot, and so then I got hired at Warner Brothers Online because it was the first job I could find that was anything other than being a writer. And so I sort of fell into this, and then ironically, it was the early days of the web. Within a year and a half, I'd been promoted to the VP of technology of a 40-man engineering group. I was 22 years old or something, and I was terrible at it, and I had no confidence. And I literally, after a couple months of doing it, apologized to the engineers I was managing. I was like, I'm sorry, I'm so bad at this. I just don't know what I'm doing. I'm completely untrained. I don't know why they put me in this role. And they were like, no, man, you're great. You're the best manager we ever had. And I was like, what are you talking about? They're like, you listen. Because the way I did the job is I did whatever they told me to do. That's all I did. And so I think all of us have different paths and different amounts of luck, is sort of how I would say it. I got very lucky to be where I was at the time I was. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all recipe for how, if you have no skills, you break into a new industry.
So I want to ask, ZipRecruiter is a unicorn, but it's also profitable, which is not normal. What's going on there?
Isn't it weird that you have to justify your profitability? The business. My favorite saying about startups is, first they ignore you, then they mock you, then they try to kill you, then they try to buy you, right? And so ZipRecruiter was bootstrapped for the first 4.5 years. We didn't take any money. We got to tens of millions of revenue before we even sort of opened our kimono to the VC community. And about year 3, we started doing really heavy offline marketing, which there's a real stigma, particularly in Northern California. If you have to market your business, there's no viral loop in your business. But meanwhile, our business took off. We were gobbling up market share across the country. And back to that saying, when we started spending all that money, everyone was mocking us. Like they were, those guys are idiots. They're going to run out of money so fast, right? And meanwhile, it was paying back with this incredible rate of return. And, from those bootstrapped performance marketing-based days where we explored every possible media channel, it really got into our DNA to be stewards of capital, to be thoughtful about where we invested, because we were never about brand. We were always about return. And it turns out we now spend well north of $100 million every year on marketing. When you spend that much money, you build a brand. You don't have to actually go out and try to do it. It just happens organically. At this point, 9 in 10 employers in America know who ZipRecruiter is, and 5 in 10 job seekers know who we are. And so, it's funny. I end up spending a lot of time explaining myself about like how we built the business and why are we profitable? Why don't we just invest every dollar? Why don't we raise $1 billion and go like try and conquer the world? But I'm feeling great about the approach that we have taken.
You were an early podcast advertiser. How did you guys decide to do that?
Do we do podcast advertising? I was going to get a T-shirt that says, "You ruined podcasting for me," because I feel like people think we're on every channel. In fact, we advertise on 91 of the 100 top podcasting channels. And if I had a piece of advice for any aspiring entrepreneur in here, over and over in my career, at every business I've been at, what's really given an opportunity for those businesses to leapfrog the competition was identifying emerging marketing opportunities. So it sounds silly to say it now, but like at previous companies, we were the first to do SEO, and then we were the first to do SEM, and everyone was like, "What's this Google thing?" And now we're the first to do satellite radio. We're the first to do podcasting, and everyone's like, "What's this podcasting thing?" There's 500,000 podcasts in America now. 500,000 people are making a living doing podcasting. Probably 50,000 are making a living, and the rest are aspiring. But the point is, the second we saw it, based on all the experience I've had in past careers, we leapt on it. And initially, the results were not great. Turns out it was an emerging market, but now it's highly lucrative, and I think it's one of those emerging channels everyone should pay attention to.
So I want to ask kind of a big picture question. Where do you see the future of recruiting in 10 years, 20 years, and even 50 years down the line?
I think the web has been underutilized for recruiting, because basically what happened with Monster and Career Builder, and even to some extent with LinkedIn and Indeed and us to this day, is you took the classifieds that were in newspapers and you moved them online. And yeah, we do slightly more sophisticated match. I shouldn't say slightly. We do significantly more sophisticated matching. But the problem of recruiting has never, as I said, just been a matching problem. And I really think we're getting to a point where you're going to have the opportunity as a job seeker to show so much more about yourself than you have been able to in a traditional resume. The resume won't go away, but the enhancements to it, the enrichment, is going to be off the charts. And you are going to be able to see who someone is at a level of clarity that goes so far beyond their ability to write a one-page document that describes their skills. And it's not just you as a human, but the algorithms are going to be able to do it. One of the most common startups that I've always joked is born dead is eHarmony for Jobs, where people say, like, I'm going to find the perfect culture fit for your company. And there's literally been over 10 of those companies. If any of you are starting that business, stop. Including eHarmony, which created a business called Elevated Careers, which also failed. We are too early, but we are close. That will become a reality in the future. And back to your scrappy, great work ethic, ready to learn individual, that person is going to be able to shine in a way they never have before.
That sounds pretty good. I think that is all the time we have. Ian, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, we have time for questions. Excellent. Does anybody want to ask a question? Yeah.
Can you speak to? Oh, hello. Oh, wow. Could you speak to remote workforces and I don't know how to outcompete the tech firms here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the time we live in is one where there's very rapidly become acceptance of remote workforces, and it's a really interesting problem for recruiting sites like our own because the two pieces of information we ask for when you post a job is what's the job title and what's the location. And it turns out for about, call it 15% of the jobs in America, location doesn't really matter. And so how do you address that? But I can tell you there is a sea change happening, particularly with enterprises and their willingness to allow remote workforces to participate in their workforce.
Yeah, I just have a question relating to when you were saying that employers, they don't necessarily know or they can describe what they're looking for, but when they see it, you give them more candidates. But could you dive a little bit more into that and with respect to what is it exactly that employers you find typically have a hard time describing? Is it the hiring attributes and specifying that? Is it specifying the key expertise they need technically? But can you dive a little deeper into what exactly they have a hard time defining?
None of us, when we go to school, get trained in how to write a job description. We are all pretty bad at it when we start. We tend to list requirements, we go look for samples online and we copy them, and we miss a lot of what creates a fulsome job description. So part of it is just selling the candidate on wanting to work there. That's something most people skip. But more importantly, let's say it's product manager is the job. Even the people who do product tacitly understand what they need a product manager to do, but have never explicitly tried to create the entire list. We actually tried to help them out where, because we get so many jobs with the same job title, we can create the superset of skills that you're looking for better than you can. I mean, we can provide job descriptions for probably 1,000 jobs that are the most common in America that are superior to what employers write to begin with. But where I think what we cannot do and why letting them thumbs up candidates matters so much is there are so many subtle signals that employers look for. It could be things like what college you went to. Oh, this person went to Stanford or MIT and they're an engineer. I definitely want to hire that person. So it's those types of details that I don't think will, you'd never write in the job description, I only want somebody who went to a top 10 Ivy League school, but that may be the candidate that you have bias towards.
All right, please give it up for Annie and Ian again.